You've probably walked past a Sports Direct or JD Sports recently and didn't think twice about it, but if you grew up in the UK during the 90s or early 2000s, there was another sports shop giant that ruled the high street. I'm talking about JJB Sports. For a generation of British shoppers, this place was the go-to for everything from football boots to that first pair of branded trainers. But then, almost in the blink of an eye, it was gone. One minute, it was a household name sponsoring stadiums, and the next, it was nothing but shuttered windows and empty units. It seems like it just vanished without warning, but the truth behind its disappearance is way crazier. We're talking massive scandals, fraud investigations, price-fixing fines, and billionaires battling for the soul of the British high street. The story starts with a man named Dave Whelan. He was a former professional footballer who transitioned into being a supermarket chain operator, but his real legacy began in 1971. Whelan bought a single sports shop in Wigan. The business was locally known as JJB's, named after the original founder John Jarvis Broughton, and Whelan decided to keep the name. It was a humble beginning, but Whelan had that aggressive, uncompromising determination that marks out the biggest retail tycoons. Throughout the 1990s, JJB Sports exploded. By 1994, the company had grown to 120 shops and was floated on the London Stock Exchange. They were expanding so fast that in July 1998, they bought out their largest domestic competitor, Sports Division. That acquisition instantly made JJB one of the largest sportswear retailers in the entire United Kingdom, pushing their sales total to over £372 million by 1999. It came to a point where they were even sponsoring the stadium for Wigan Athletic, cementing their name into British sporting culture. The brand's absolute peak was around 2005. JJB had expanded to over 430 shops across the UK and Ireland. Dave Whelan was flying around the country in the company helicopter, visiting suppliers and checking out the competition like a general surveying his battlefield. They even had those all-weather football pitches called soccer domes and health clubs attached to their superstores. It seemed like the perfect business model. But while Whelan was flying high, the ground beneath him was shifting and two major competitors were preparing to go in for the kill. On one side, you had JD Sports. Founded in 1981 by John Wardle and David Macken, JD was trying to become the king of trainers. They were positioning themselves as a fashion-forward destination. They acquired brands like First Sport and All Sports, and later moved into premium fashion with brands like Bank Stores and Scott's. On the other side of the spectrum, you had Mike Ashley and Sports Direct. Ashley's strategy was the complete opposite of JD. He was the master of pile it high, sell it cheap. If you wanted a bargain, you went to Sports Direct. This left JJB Sports in an awkward position. They weren't cool enough to compete with JD Sports on fashion, and they weren't cheap enough to compete with Sports Direct on price. They were just there. And in the ruthless world of retail, being just there is a death sentence. To make matters worse, the company got wrapped up in a scandal when it emerged that they'd colluded with other retailers to fix the price of football tops, a move which would eventually see them forced to pay compensation to their customers. But the real rot didn't set in until June 2007, when Dave Whelan, perhaps sensing the wind changing, sold his remaining 29% stake in the company. He cashed out for a cool £190 million. In hindsight, Whelan's timing was impeccable. He walked away with a fortune just before the global financial crisis hit, and right before JJB started its nosedive. The man who took over Whelan's stake was Chris Ronnie, a sportswear retailer who had previously worked at Umbro and, ironically, Sports Direct. But the Ronnie era was essentially a disaster movie in slow motion. Ronnie was backed by the Icelandic financial group Exista, which might sound fancy, until you remember that the Icelandic banking system basically collapsed in 2008. As things started to sour, Ronnie tried to pivot JJB upmarket. He wanted to make it more of a lifestyle brand to compete with JD, so he bought brands like the Original Shoe Company and Cube. It was a bold move, but a total failure. These acquisitions were disasters, hemorrhaging money and confusing the core customers who just wanted football kits and running shoes. Chris Ronnie's tenure ended in disgrace. In 2009, he was fired for gross misconduct after it emerged that his stake in the company had been seized by administrators of the collapsed Icelandic bank Kaupthing. Ronnie claimed he didn't know the shares weren't his anymore, which is a pretty wild defense for a CEO, but the board didn't buy it. To make matters worse, JJB admitted that former executives were being investigated by the Serious Organized Crime Agency and HM Revenue and Customs. JJB was literally turning into a crime scene. Enter Sir David Jones. He was brought in as the White Knight to save the company. He had a great reputation, having previously turned around Next, one of Britain's largest retailers. But even the White Knight had mud on his armor. A massive scandal erupted when it was revealed that Sir David Jones had accepted a £1.5 million personal loan from both JJB founder Dave Whelan and Mike Ashley, the owner of JJB's arch-rival Sports Direct. It was speculated that he might have done so to cover massive gambling debts. This was a massive conflict of interest. It looked terrible. Investors got a whiff of scandal and started pulling their support. The £100 million fundraiser that was supposed to save the company was suddenly on hold because people were terrified of what might come out next in the Sunday papers. By 2011, JJB was a zombie company. They had debt piles of £31.5 million, they were closing 95 shops, and they were facing the prospect of a hostile takeover. JD Sports and Sports Direct were eating up JJB's market share for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. Sales had fallen off a cliff, and JJB was forced to enter a company voluntary arrangement, basically a type of insolvency procedure, just to stop paying rent on empty shops. They were desperate. They even managed to convince the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to invest in them in 2009, but by the time the dust settled, even Bill Gates had lost millions on this sinking ship. There was one last glimmer of hope in 2012. The US giant, Dick's Sporting Goods, invested £20 million in JJB. But within months, even they wrote off the entire investment as worthless. They took one look at the books and the deteriorating performance and realized there was no saving it. The end came on September 24, 2012, as shares in JJB Sports were suspended and the firm called in the administrators. The market value of the company, which had been £500 million in 2010, had collapsed to just £1.2 million. On October 1st, 2012, the final nail was hammered into the coffin. But who was holding the hammer? It was Mike Ashley and Sports Direct. In a move that felt like a final victory lap for Ashley, Sports Direct purchased the JJB brand name, the website, and just 20 shops for around £23.77 million. JJB's collapse was the result of a perfect storm. Every possible thing that could go wrong did go wrong. It was a failure to adapt to a changing market where you had to be either high fashion or high value. JJB was neither. It was the hubris of management who thought they could pivot to lifestyle fashion without understanding the customer. It was the internal rot of scandals, from price fixing to shady loans, that scared off investors when the company needed them most. And ultimately, it was the ruthlessness of competitors like Sports Direct and JD Sports who simply did their jobs better. The sad part is, the fall of JJB wasn't a surprise to those watching closely. It was inevitable. The company had been staggering like an injured footballer for years, weighed down by debt and poor leadership. When you look back at it, the collapse of JJB Sports is a cautionary tale for every retailer. No matter how big you are, no matter how many helicopters your CEO flies, if you lose your identity and lose your customers' trust, the high street will chew you up and spit you out. Today, the UK sports retail market is effectively a duopoly. You have the slick, premium vibe of JD Sports, which is still expanding globally and buying up brands left and right. And you have the discount warehouse dominance of Sports Direct. JJB Sports is just a memory, a nostalgic thought for people remembering where they bought their first football shirt. It's a reminder of how quickly the mighty can fall. But what do you reckon? Do you miss the days of the JJB Superstore, or was it always destined for the scrap heap? Drop your memories in the comments. We'd love to hear your take. And if you enjoyed the video, give us a like, hit that subscribe button, and tap the bell so you don't miss any more proper deep dives like this one. Cheers for watching, and we'll catch you next time.